Well, we're almost to the end. During development, we're able to play our game from within the Unity editor, but obviously most of our players will not have Unity installed. So we need to get our game in a playable form for one or more target platforms. This process is called building the game. In this video, we'll discuss how to build and test our Unity projects outside of Unity. Okay, we've been saving our scene as we've been going along, so everything should be saved. But before you make a build, always make sure that the current open scene is saved by going to File, Save, or selecting Control S on Windows or Command S on the Mac to make sure the open scene is saved. Now notice in the File menu, there is also a Save Project option. This will save any project settings not related to the scene. However, this is done when you save a scene or quit Unity, so you don't really have to worry about using the Save Project option, as long as you consistently save your scenes. Okay, let's make a build now. So in the File menu, one down is the Build Settings option. I always recommend going into Build Settings. Don't just go to Build and Run, because often you need to change the settings of the build. And by selecting that, it brings up the Build Settings window. You can see the top options is Scenes in Build. This is one of the most common problems that people have when they make builds, is they forget to include the scenes that they want in the build. So remember, your scenes are like the levels of your game, and you want to include any of the levels in your game that you want in the build. So in this project, we only have one scene that you can see over here in the project panel. And to include the scenes, you could just simply drag and drop them into this box. And you can see now I will include the solar system scene. Now, there is a convenient option. If I just delete this, I can click the Add Open Scenes button, and that will add the scene that is currently open. But if you do have multiple scenes, you often have to drag them into this panel, like you will in future projects. Now, the next thing that we want to do is set the platform that we want to build to. And of course, in Unity, you can build to a whole variety of platforms. Initially, let's build to what platform you're working on, so either Windows or Mac. So both of those options are under the first platform option here, PC, Mac, and Linux standalone. Notice the little Unity icon there shows that that is the current selected option. Now, the next thing is there are sub options for each platform. So right now, my target platform is set to Windows. If you're on a Mac, yours might likely be set to Mac OS, which is fine for now. So I'll just stay on Windows. The next option down is architecture. And I could actually build to either a 32-bit x86 chipset or a 64-bit x86 chipset. So these are the Intel chipsets that you commonly find in Windows. I'm just going to stay with the default of 64-bit. There are various other options here. Most of them you do not have to worry about. I'll just go with the defaults. But before I build, there are a variety of player settings that you will want to modify. So go ahead and click on Player Settings. And this will bring up the Project Settings panel and bring you to the Player tab. Now, a couple things that we want to do here. In our build, we want the application to reflect who we are, so we can actually specify a company name. So you can type whatever you want here. I'll type Michigan State University. We also have a product name. This will default to the name of your current open project, but you can always override that if you want to call the app something different. And a version number. This defaults to 0.1. I'll go ahead and change this to 1.0. Now, the next thing is we can specify a default icon. If you don't specify an icon, you'll just end up with the standard Unity logo icon. So it's always a nice thing to customize the icon. So you can see it's looking for a texture 2D file. If I click select here, it'll bring up my select texture 2D option. And we did provide a potential icon for you. That's the sun icon image right here. So I'll go ahead and select that. You'll notice that it's a 512 pixel by 512 pixel PNG. But of course, you can make this whatever you want. So I'll go ahead and close this. Notice that the default icon is now selected. Now let me quickly run through some of the other options that you see down here below. The first being icon. So if I open that, you can see that the default icon that I selected is actually reflected here at a whole variety of different sizes. Now, if for some reason one of these sizes didn't look right, or you wanted to have something different for one of these various sizes, you can see it goes all the way down to very small sizes. You can click this override option, and then you can select a specific texture for one of these different sizes. If you don't select a texture, it will just default to what you set above. I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to go with what I set above and close up the icon option. The next setting down is resolution and presentation. So let me select that. And here you can set up if you want the game to run full screen or within a window. So this full screen mode right here allows you to pick various full screen options or windowed options. I'll just stick with full screen. You can also set the resolution and aspect ratios that the game supports here. So notice it says default resolution. Right now that's checked. If I uncheck this, I can actually set a width and height in pixels here. So whatever I want, obviously it needs to be supported by the end user's device. Let me just go back to default to the native resolution of the user. And if I scroll down, there is the supported aspect ratios, which cascades opened or closed. So if it's closed, go ahead and open that. And this shows what aspect ratios my game supports. And right now everything is checked by default. But if you make your game specific to a given aspect ratio, so for example, if we're going to like a standard high definition aspect ratio, we might want to turn all of these off except for 16:9. Now, it's ideal if your game supports all aspect ratios, but sometimes the way you set up your user interface, your heads-up display in the game, may require it to be a certain aspect ratio. But for this game, it supports all aspect ratios, so I'll leave all of them checked. So we didn't really change anything here, but let me close that up and go down to the next option, which is the splash image option. The splash image is what allows you to create a sequence of images at the beginning of your game, sort of like at the beginning of a film where it shows the different companies that was involved in the production. You could do the same thing here very easily without writing any code. Basically, you just add logos here. So you would just click the plus and then select a 2D sprite in your game. I don't really have any here, but this shows how you might select one of these things. So that logo will appear for 2 seconds, and of course I can adjust the time of that. And I can have a whole sequence of logos that appear. Let me select that and remove it, because I don't actually want that. Now, one thing that will always show when your application starts up is the Made with Unity logo. You can see this is grayed out. I cannot turn this off. Now, that's because I'm using the free version of Unity. If you use the actual professional version of Unity, the one you pay for, it does have the option to turn that off if you don't want to show the Unity logo. So let me go ahead and close the splash image options. And let me open up the last set here, which is the other settings. Now, the other settings are a whole variety of technical settings that you often will not need to mess with. But if you do, this is where you find them. So for example, one of the things, if you target something like the Mac App Store, you have to specify a bundle identifier. And if you target something like iOS or the Android App Store, there is also a bundle identifier for those. So you would set those things within the player settings here before you build. Now I'm just going to stick with all the defaults here. So let me close up my other settings. So really the only thing I changed was the company name, the version number, and I set a default icon here. So let me go ahead and close this up, and we're ready to do our build. So I'll go ahead and click build. And the standard save dialog will come up here where it's asking me where do I want to save my build. Now, I always like to create a builds folder within my project folder. So right now you can see I'm in my solar system project folder, and we've got the various subfolders like the assets, of course. But at this top level, I'm going to go ahead and create a new folder, and I'm going to call it builds. And I'll keep all my builds inside the builds folder. Now make sure you don't put your builds folder inside the asset folder. Unity kind of freaks out if there are builds within the assets folder. So now let me go into my builds folder, and I'm going to build for a variety of platforms. So I'm going to start with my Windows platform. So I'll create a new folder and I'll call it Windows. And then go into the Windows folder and go ahead and select that folder. Now Unity will go through the process of actually building my game. Depending on the size and complexity of your game, this process might take a little while, but the solar system is pretty small project, so it builds relatively quick. And my build is done. And here I am back in the File Explorer, and you'll see that it built my solar system exe. This is a double-clickable application. And it also included a whole variety of other files and folders. Now, if I were to give this to somebody, I would have to include all of these files and folders. So basically, the entire contents of that Windows folder. Now, just to show that this works, I'm going to go ahead and double-click on this. And this will open just like any other application. You can see that with the Made with Unity logo. And, here's my solar system. I can click on the planets or the moon. And here comes a comet and so forth. And, just like any application, we can quit it. On Windows, we can hit Alt F4. If you're on the Mac, you would hit Command Q. So our Windows build is created. Let me go back into Unity and let's make a Mac OS build now. If you made a Mac OS build before, go ahead and make a Windows one now. So we're on the right platform option. We just need to change our target from Windows to Mac OS 10. And when you switch settings, sometimes it takes a few moments to, recompress assets or, switch your settings over to the new platform. Going between Windows and Mac is actually really quick. Notice there are a few different options down below here. We won't change any of those. And if you go into player settings, it's all of the same settings. So you don't have to change your player settings between Windows and Mac. So let me close that and let's go ahead and build. Just like before, we want to create a folder for the Mac OS build. So you can see we've got our Windows folder here. I'm in my builds folder. Let me create a new folder and I'll call this Mac OS. And let me go into that folder and then select the folder for building. And Unity will go through the process now of building a Mac app. And one really nice thing is when you're on Windows, you can build a Mac app. And when you're on Mac, you can build a Windows app. And for some reason, Unity didn't actually put it into that subfolder. And also kind of an oddity, when you're on Windows and building for Mac, it calls it macOS.app. You can go ahead and rename this. You just keep the .app. So I'm going to rename this solar system .app. So it follows the same format that we had on Windows. And I'll drag and drop it into my Mac OS folder. One thing to notice on the Mac OS app is it is a single file. Now on Windows, it looks like a folder. If you double click on it, you can actually go into it. On a Mac, this would look like a single double clickable application. So it kind of hides all of the complexity. All of those other files that you saw on the Windows build are all hidden within that .app folder. Okay, we've got our Windows and Mac app created. Of course, I'm on Windows right now, so I can't actually test the Mac app. I can't double click on it to load it. But of course, I could, zip up this Mac OS folder and provide it to my Mac friends out there to run. Okay, let's make our last build, and we're going to build for WebGL. So this is actually a different platform. So to switch platforms, I would click on WebGL, and this shows some of the settings, but it actually hasn't switched the platform. So you can see the little icon is still up here. So if I click Switch Platform, that will actually switch it to WebGL. And when you switch platforms, it typically takes a while because it has to re-import all of the assets, recompress the assets. So depending on the complexity of your project, it may take a while. I've actually done this switch before. It actually caches those things, so it actually was pretty quick for me, but it may take a little while for you. Now, before I do the WebGL build, I'm going to go to player settings again and notice that there is different tabs down here. So previously we were on this tab, which is the PC, Mac, and Linux standalone tab. But the WebGL tab has this little HTML5 logo, and there are different settings. Now, one of the differences, if you go into resolution and presentation, we can actually set the width and height that our game will appear within the web browser. So it defaults here in Unity to 960 by 600. I'll just stick with the default, but you can actually change that if you so chose. Also, you can pick a WebGL template. So you can see there's a default template and a minimal template. I'm just going to go with the default for now. One of the other important settings down here are the publishing settings. Now, under the publishing setting, there is an option at the bottom that says decompress fallback. Now, from my experience, you need to check this option. So this allows your WebGL content to work on a wide variety of web servers out there. If you don't check this and you serve it through certain servers out there, the WebGL will fail to load. So for now, I do recommend going in and always checking this decompress fallback option under the publishing settings within the player settings for WebGL. So really, that's the only change that we made. So let me go ahead and close these up and then click build. Just like before, we need to specify where we want to put our build. So I'm going to create a new folder for this, and I'll call it WebGL. I'll go into that build folder and select it, and it will go through the process of building for WebGL. Now, building for WebGL does take quite a bit longer than building for PC and Mac, so I'm going to go ahead and fast forward my video here. Okay, we've got our WebGL build created. If I go in here, you'll notice that there's a variety of files and folders. Most notably, there's an index.html file. This is the actual file that will open up in the web browser. And this file will reference various subfiles that are in the builds and template data folder. So just like with the Windows build, you would need to include all of the contents here if you were going to upload this to a website. Now, one of the challenges of WebGL is it's not easy to test it locally due to security features built into the web browsers today. So if you want to test your WebGL, you need to actually upload it to a server on the internet, which I'll show how to do in the next video. Okay, so we have our 3 builds created now. I do recommend testing your builds on the target platform before commercially distributing it. Generally, if things work in the editor, it should work in the build, but sometimes there are slight issues that do come up. So I do recommend testing if at all possible. But for purposes of this course, I recommend at least testing on the platform you're on. So if you're on Windows, test the Windows build. If you're on Mac, test the Mac build. If it works there, it likely will work on the other platform. And test your WebGL build once you get it uploaded to the internet, which we will show in the next video.